Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
but I have the files. I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, that guy, how can that be possible? The brain, pistols and fondle slab of choice. I don't know computers, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to just read these two sources whenever I try to prove out. It's not. If you expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to be sadly disappointed. Another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man.
Really? Can't be serious. Is this really how you want things to be? Come on. More hooker, eruptions, whatever. Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from FEMA Region 2, within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America. We bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that's that.
For a 19-year-old girl to eventually get up to gumption to put these things out.
And we are live on UCY.TV radio. It is Saturday night. It is the Ochelli Effect. I am Chuck Ochelli, your host. So, let us begin with a couple of personal notes before I get on with my presentation for the evening. Let's see, my larger dog is outside making a lot of noise. You guys might hear that. But a couple of personal notes just before I get anything else going. Happy Flag Day to you. I know it's Flag Day because this is the day that my oldest child was born, Caitlin. Happy birthday to you. And, it was really great to talk to you today and to hear from your own mouth, finally, that you don't think your dad is entirely crazy. I want to thank you for that, and also just thank you for being who you are, because you are absolutely the reason why I do what I do. You, your brother, and your soon-to-be youngest brother. So, that being said, also earlier today, Mr. Souvenir, that was not a reference to Kant. That was an Ochelliism that you got on your little message there that you read, just so you know. Okay. Now, moving forward, and Katie, I do hope you are listening. If not, maybe you'll catch this on the archives. It came to my attention recently that CNN was, as it is evolving into this A&E network type of experience that we're all being, exposed to, where they're giving us these sort of docu-history sort of, microcosms of things. They're giving us these series. They're doing a whole lot of these, murder and mystery series as well. And what can I tell you? Except that it has changed. It is not the 24-hour news channel it used to be. And just as a quick warning also to my regular listeners, I am still having that problem with being able to read Skype messages, so let's try not to hit me with too many of those, because I don't want to miss what you're saying. Grabbing the trusty magnifying glass. Yes, Michelle, if you want to join in, you're more than welcome, but I don't know if this one might bore you a little bit. So, like I was saying, CNN has sort of evolved into this new sort of channel, which is very much like the A&E channel once was, where you had these, like I said, these documentaries, these demonstrations about historical events and also crimes and things like this, with the Bill Curtis type voice. And I think even I caught a couple of Bill Curtis replays on there myself. I'm not sure. If not, there's another announcer whose name always eludes me, but is commonly utilized by that network of channels as well to voice over a lot of things, and he was involved as well. Now, again, all of that having been part of the conversation before, the deal is this. I was protesting for quite a while, and publicly I was writing op-ed pieces which appeared in a bunch of New Jersey-based newspapers, also appeared without a byline in some New York newspapers, may have actually appeared in other parts of the country because I did mail out probably 200 separate pieces that I hand wrote, basically protesting the use of Vincent Bugliosi's book, Reclaiming History, which was going to be utilized for the purposes of creating a 12 or 13 or 11-part, depending on whose notes you were reading, miniseries on the JFK assassination. Vince Bugliosi, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure there aren't too many people listening to me that don't, is the guy who is most famously known for prosecuting Charles Manson. He was an L.A. County District Attorney. Also had some links to the RFK assassination, actually saying that stating that the RFK assassination was not a crime of significance was very much like, and I'm paraphrasing here, was very much like comparing it to a one-joint marijuana case when not acknowledging the aspects of conspiracy that were involved there. And as you guys know, I brought you Scott Enyart to give you some perspective on that night and what happened, in 1968 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. But Bugliosi was involved in litigation post-assassination there. Now, moving forward, in the 1980s, he was also part of a London weekend television presentation on the assassination, which was called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, or On Trial Lee Harvey Oswald, which aired in the UK, but was also aired here in the United States in a very sort of condensed form on Showtime. The television network that is generally known for movies and has gone back to making more original series and things like that. Dexter, Californication, you name it. Just in brief, we know what we're talking about here. But that presentation was made on there, and of course, Bugliosi very selectively chose his witnesses, very selectively chose his evidence, and pretty much delivered a prosecutor's brief in favor of the Warren Commission conclusions. And of course, again, with this, sort of poorly acted out mock trial, concluded with two different votes, actually, in the U.S., two different telephone call-in votes, one concluding that Oswald had not done it, one concluding that Oswald was very guilty. Jerry Spence was his opponent in this mock trial, another famous trial lawyer, both of them really having never lost cases in a courtroom. Spence was rather ill-prepared and figured generally that it would be a rather easy case to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the shooter. And of course, he was tried in absentia for even the mock trial. A large, I would say, 2-foot by 3-foot black and white photograph of Oswald was utilized to represent him there, and they tried to bring on a lot of interesting witnesses, and there are some interesting witness testimonies contained within, but again, this is for a television trial, which they tell the viewer was held in Dallas. It was not held in Dallas. It was actually held in London. It was, overseen by a trial judge who had practiced as a judge in Dallas County. There were Dallas County citizens making up the jury per se for this mock trial. But believe me, this is no indication of a lack of prejudice on the Dallas citizens' part or anything else. They were drawn from the jury pool. We must realize that Dallas was quite aptly stamped the city of hate before the JFK assassination, and has evermore been known as the place where our 35th president had been publicly executed. So, I digress quite a bit here, but my reading of Reclaiming History was very arduous. It was a very difficult task. It is, when combining the CD-ROM and the text, is well over 2,000 pages. Normally when I read a book, I read it in 3 stages, where there's initial reading, there is a second sort of more precise, focused reading, and then generally I go through and fact-check and annotate my books. This has been one of my practices, and that's why when I tell you that I've read 300 books, it's more like 900 because I've read them 3 times a piece generally. However, in the case of Reclaiming History, I had no need to do so because it was rather easily seen as the prosecutor's brief that it was. And Michelle Mishuli joins me, by the way. While I'm in the midst of this little presentation, I don't know if you caught any of it so far, Michelle?
I just snuck in.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm getting to the meat of the subject anyway, and I wished my daughter a happy birthday and a few other things before I got started, and said Happy Flag Day to everyone. So, there was a few things that really weren't part of the presentation, so let me begin from here. The 200 letters that I had told you guys about, these 200 op-ed pieces, which I had handwritten each individual one, I sent to newspapers and online publications. There was emails also, but that doesn't count in the 200. I sent them out protesting the fact that Tom Hanks and Playtone were going to utilize this Oswald Did It monstrosity, which sold rather terribly, thank God, and was quite the cinder block of a sleepy book. But it was utilized, and Hanks and Gary Getzman in particular were very interested and praising Bugliosi and all that. And I'm telling you that we attacked HBO with this stuff. We hit their email. We hit. It wasn't just me, but the 200 letters I'm talking about, the 200 literal pieces of mail, that was me. You can probably find some of this stuff if you go back a couple of years in the online versions of some local newspapers in New Jersey. They published it almost in whole. The USA Today was rather nasty to me and published about 2 sentences and gave me no byline. The New York Times refused it outright. The Wall Street Journal did not utilize it, but did publish an article rather conspicuously at about the same time, praising the whole thing instead of the counter argument that I was making. But why do I bring this up when I'm telling you about the CNN presentation? Because this series, the 60s, they're running right now, is another case of this prolific propaganda, which mainstream historians have, without regard to the facts, without regard to any sort of real investigation, have put out there. And, of course, when it comes to the JFK thing, you know that Chuck is going to start screaming. Well, here's the thing. This is really the result of the fact that we sort of dislodged this from HBO with the overwhelming avalanche of criticism. Okay, we actually, went after the post-production people. I literally spoke to people that were supposed to do music on the project and everything else. However, it is now being presented as a 2-hour piece as part of the 60s. Okay, which is this series by Playtone again. And the next one coming up is going to be on the Vietnam War, and I'm sure that's going to be another, puff propaganda piece as well. Never focusing on the realities of it. Poor Lyndon Johnson. I mean, if you just look at the commercial, you can see what the deal was. In fact, here's an interesting thing. It says, the big graphics come up and say, JFK didn't want it, which is something that previous to Oliver Stone, most historians and media people absolutely blame the Vietnam War on JFK, refusing to acknowledge that he was actually pulling us out of it and wanted us out by 1965, which would have given us a completely different set of circumstances than we now see in our history. But the first graphic says JFK didn't want it and LBJ couldn't stop it. Well, if you believe that, I'm telling you again, I got this wonderful waterfront property right on this nice spot in Nevada. You guys will love it. It's right on the Atlantic Ocean. Okay? And I'm selling it all day. You know, and I know that this sounds like just one of these things where I'm just going to sound off and it's just going to be one of these, you know, constantly boring deals, but I'm going to tell you exactly what's in this thing. I sat down and I gave it a once through, which, again, with documentaries is not something I usually like to do, but I don't have cable television at this point. I just borrowed somebody else's cable feed just to be able to witness this mess that I knew was going to ensue. Anyway, Michelle, did you happen to catch any of that stuff, or in fact any of the crap that went on at the 2013 observance, the 50th anniversary observance of the assassination?
I'm going to be honest with you. I am just delving into the meat of this, and I mean, you're kind of inspiring me, so I am pretty much here as a pupil, and I'm here to take it and learn. So honestly, I'm going to be upfront. I didn't. So educate me.
Well, you know what's weird about that is that you're in Texas, and you know, and I went through Texas at one point myself, and you know what's funny? I did not go to Dealey Plaza. I absolutely did not, because I was a touring musician at the time and simply did not have time to go to Dealey Plaza during my only trip to Texas. You know, but I'm willing to bet, though, that you're somebody that, even though it's a whole lot closer to you than it is to a lot of the listeners, I bet you that you haven't been to Dealey Plaza either.
I haven't, and I actually used to live in the DFW area. I've driven by it, but I never stopped and went around. See?
This is the thing, though. I mean, it's one of these ignored things until they start ratcheting up all this, you know, released, you know, prefabricated propaganda, again, backing the Warren Commission, yada, yada, yada. And this is what happened in 2013, and this is why I didn't want to even participate in it, because it felt to me very much like the circus came to town. So, on with the CNN deal. Okay, so, you know, at the open, we have your general montage. Normally, JFK documentaries begin with a montage of films. I recognize exactly the source of the films. There's one called 2 Days, The Last 2 Days, which was filmed by a Navy photographer and put together. It's a compilation of footage from Fort Worth, the trip through Dealey Plaza. Even though he's the only professional photographer with running film at the time, and he's following the motorcade, and we have all that great film where you see the back of the limousine and everything else, and also the most famous pictures of the Newmans laying on the grassy knoll, covering their children during and after the shooting. That is part of this man's film, but somehow or other he did not capture the assassination in any way, shape, or form. That's a story for another day. But that film, in conjunction with local Dallas TV footage that we've all seen, where everyone's scrambling to try and get on their microphones, turn on their cameras, Walter Cronkite at first speaking with the CBS breaking news across the screen, because it actually took time to warm up their giant TV studio cameras, and he could only get on the air in audio fashion to begin with at the time the shots were fired. Okay, so all this stuff comes on. These are iconic images. They've been replayed over and over again. Trust me, if you've watched two things having to do with the assassination, you've seen this footage. Okay. Excuse me. Then we have the previous. Okay. The archival footage of the day before the assassination, the days leading up to the assassination, where we see live broadcasts that were made by Police Chief of Dallas, Jesse Curry, who was making announcements about we don't expect any trouble, but we want you to know that law enforcement will be out there in effect to make sure that there is no embarrassing or terrible act that is committed while the president visits. The reason for this, of course, is because Adlai Stevenson, who was the ambassador to the United Nations, had been in Dallas only a few weeks before and had actually been struck by a picketer with a sign and everything else. The John Burke Society was out in full force. In the Dallas Morning News and in flyers on the streets, there were Kennedy wanted for treason posters. There were large 2-page announcements in the local newspapers explaining, Mr. Kennedy, can you explain basically why you're soft on communism, and all these other interesting things. Excuse me again. So this is interesting for context. Okay, fine. Then we are treated with, of course, the first appearance of an aged Dan Rather. A lot of people don't realize that Dan Rather's career began because he was a reporter on the ground the day that Kennedy was killed. He was I believe, a KRLD TV reporter at the time. Anyway, he was our man in Dallas, Dan Rather, as far as Walter Cronkite was concerned, and as far as the rest of the country got to see. He was one of the main talking heads during the entire weekend on the ground in Dallas locally. So we're treated to him about how terrible it was and all that. Then we get to see Robert McNeil and the NBC reports, and the WBAP radio reports are then fed over other footage and all that kind of stuff. And you can recognize this. Again, it's pretty typical. Jay Watson, who was a WFAA reporter, most famously was the first man to interview Abraham Zapruder, who took the most famous film of the assassination. But he also interviewed the Newmans and a few other people that he could pull into his studio right away. And I mean minutes after, these people were still out of breath. We then are dealt, we get to look at some of the witnesses right there, some of the stuff I was just talking about, and we're only about 7 minutes into this thing. Okay, at about 11 minutes in, because we take a commercial break, about 11 minutes in, we're dealing with the Zapruder witnesses. We're also given a quick, sort of summary interview with one of Zapruder's daughters or granddaughters, I can't remember which. Talking about the film and how, extremely crazy it was that her grandfather, it was her grandfather. Her grandfather captured the film, Abraham Zapruder, who was a dress manufacturer who had an office in the Daltex building, which was the sister building to the School Book Depository building. And then we're treated with a real honest guy named Chuck Brem. And Charles Brem was there with his son. I can't remember his son's name off the top of my head. I think it was Joseph Brem, who was about 5 or between 3 and 5 years of age. He was trying to get him to wave his arm at the president. When the shots were fired, Brem had been a combat vet, had bullet wounds in his arms and his shoulders from being struck in Korea, I believe. And he understood that it was gunfire. He stated, and throughout his life, he stated that he thought that there were 3 shots, but there could have very easily have been more, because he was much more interested in protecting his son, not quite to the extreme that the Newmans did. Who is the next person that we hear from, which we don't often hear from, is Gail Newman, who has passed away now. Bill Newman is still alive, by the way, but Gail Newman, who was his wife that day, they were very young. They had the 2 young children. You see them on the grassy knoll all the time. Okay. Then we're treated with a clip of Jean Hill. Now, of course, they utilize a clip of Jean Hill, which makes it sound like she didn't see any shots. She didn't know where the shots were coming from, but she ran across the street toward the grassy knoll anyway because other people were running over there. If you examine the whole of her interviews, her books, the statements she made over the years, and everything else, you'll find that she did actually believe she saw a shooter on the knoll. And she was there standing next to Mary Moorman, who took the most famous Polaroid of the assassination. Okay. Then, of course, we deal with Robert Cairo, who is basically an LBJ apologist and has been writing volumes about it, barely touches on the assassination and LBJ's actions, pretty much considers that Lyndon Baines Johnson was a master politician and sort of deserving of the presidency of the United States anyway, totally ignores all of the factual corruption. I mean, that day in Dallas, as a matter of fact, if you were listening to the radio, because I happen to have the radio broadcasts of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 different network radio broadcasts in their entirety from that day in Dallas that I have on MP3 myself, and you can listen to the scandals that were going on surrounding the vice president. You can hear that there were corruption scandals, there were possibilities of bribes. You can look up a guy named Bobby Baker, who was LBJ's right-hand man in the Senate, and continued to be one of his minions, let's just say, in the political process when he was vice president. There are plenty of accusations dating throughout the LBJ presidency, but also all the way back to 1947, where there was a stolen election, and if you don't believe me, go look it up. Anyway, Then we deal with, how Rather's career was made, a little more footage of Cronkite, obviously, still reporting about the shooting. Then we get the History Channel compilation where you see Bob Huffaker, who was the guy who most famously kept saying Lee Harold Oswald when he was shot, by the way, in the Dallas police basement. You get Robert McNeil again, who actually cried on the air when he was on the telephone at the school book depository immediately after the shooting, trying to describe what happened to NBC in New York. Let's see here. Malcolm Kilduff, who is the guy who actually makes the announcement to the world. He's the guy who quite often, many conspiracy theorists, and I disagree with this heavily, point to the fact that he points to his temple and says, "It is a matter, Tom," because he was speaking to Tom Wicker of the New York Times. He says, "It's a matter, Tom, of a bullet right through the brain." And he puts his finger up to his head, up to the front of his head. He was told that by Admiral George Berkeley as the follow-on comment. You don't see that footage on television very often because it does evoke the idea that he may have been shot through the head. However, if you follow what Kilduff said, and guess what? I have his statements on tape about it. He didn't have any sort of meaning behind that gesture outside of a quick gesture that he made. And he was distraught. He was having trouble. He wasn't supposed to be the press secretary, by the way. He was just about to get fired by the Kennedy administration. That's a little-known fact out there, by the way. But that day, he was the guy who was with him. He was the assistant press secretary and ended up just sort of making that historical announcement. Johnson kept him on, by the way. Okay. So then we get the whole chaos and confusion during the opening moments, and they blamed it on two people. They blamed it on a man and a woman. They thought that there was people in the railroad yard. They thought there were people in the school book depository building. They thought there were people on the roofs. All of this stuff is kind of spuriously added because it's not actually. If you look at the timeline from the footage and you actually understand, if you look at the raw broadcast from that day, this is not the way it happened. There was a little bit of confusion to start with. They called it bursts of gunfire as opposed to single shots. There was this whole thing about Jackie screaming, "Oh no," and the car speeding on and all this stuff. There was some confusion, but this kind of confusion where they didn't know where the shots were coming from is not true. You can find tons and tons of people that say that there had to have been shots from more than one place, including Orville Nix, by the way, who was, one of the guys who took one of the other most famous films, not Zapruder's film, but from the opposite side of the street. There are two very close angles. One of them was done by Orville Nix, which, by the way, his daughter is on Facebook and wrote a book all about the film and how angry he was that his film was edited when it was returned to him by the FBI and all that. But also there was another lady who was filming at almost exactly the same angle as Nix, called Marie Muchmore. Now the problem with the Muchmore photos is that the resolution is poor. Nix was actually using an indoor film as opposed to an outdoor film, so the imagery in those films is a little bit off. It's not as crisp as the Zapruder film, and Zapruder is also unique because he was the only one on that side of Elm Street. Okay. So, back to where I was. We got the chaos thing. Let's see, 303, 301, okay. Oh, right. So, initially also, when they saw the rifle being taken out of the school book depository building, which was pretty quickly afterwards, the search of the school book depository building that you see on film was actually done by a Dallas-based cameraman named Tom Allier. However, the individuals that were there at the time and Allier himself felt that the actual images that he wound up, by the way, having to toss out of the window of the school book depository because the building was sealed, those images actually are more like reenactments because they actually replaced some of the items and then picked them up for the camera. But, again, don't believe me. Now, there was a 303, a 3030, and a Mauser reported at first as the rifle that was taken out of the school book depository building. There's plenty of discussion about more than one rifle being removed from the school book depository building. That's a whole, you can spend weeks on that if you like, but The problem here is that, of course, everybody reported the wrong rifle to start with. As a matter of fact, at some points they were calling it a Japanese-made rifle. Let's see, the British Enfield was one of them that was reported, and like I said, the German Mauser is one of the ones that went across the networks. Now, the German Mauser and the whole story with Roger Craig is another thing that they didn't obviously touch on, but I'll just throw my opinion out there is that Craig claims to have seen the stamp of the Mauser on the barrel of the gun. The problem is that if you mount a scope, which no one disputes the fact that there was a 4-power scope mounted on the rifle, and I mean no one. As to whether it was defective, useful, or mounted properly is another story, but the 4-power scope was on the rifle, and when you mount one onto a Mauser, the location where Craig says he saw the Mauser stamp for any German Mauser which had been manufactured circa World War II all the way up to that time would have been obscured by the mounting of the scope. So I have my doubts about Mr. Craig. But anyway, we are then treated with Bentley and McDonald and Lee Harvey Oswald's capture. Bentley and McDonald were two of the main arresting officers. I believe Bentley, I got to think about this carefully. It's either Bentley or McDonald that actually wound up popping Oswald. I believe it was Bentley popped Oswald upside the head and actually wound up getting some of his skin under his ring after he had been subdued and all that. After he replaced his revolver in his holster, he actually turned around and whacked Oswald once up the head and took some skin off him. But that capture, of course, was in the Texas Theater. They go over this really quickly, which, of course, newsmen, within a matter of moments, were able to get out there, photograph it. There was FBI. There was actually an angry mob outside. And you can see footage of Oswald being dragged out of the front of the Texas Theater in terror if you want. I'm sure you can find it on the Internet. Okay. Upon his arrest, we have, let's see, no mention, Secret Service agents. Okay, now here's another thing. We're dealing with the Lee Harvey Oswald arrest and the drama going on at Parkland Hospital. Barely even a mention of the fact that the Secret Service, against the laws of the state of Texas, removed the body of the president from the jurisdiction in which it should have been examined. So there was no autopsy performed by Dr. Earl Rose, who was the coroner of Dallas County at the time, who was legally within his right to demand that the president's body remain there. Because let's not forget that at that time, there was no federal law in which someone could be prosecuted for the assassination of a president. I'm not kidding you. Look it up. Okay? You could sooner get prosecuted for shooting a park ranger. There was a law for that. But shooting the President of the United States was a local matter. It was a murder, plain and simple. It was a matter of fact for the DA of Dallas County, the coroner of Dallas County, and the local authorities to handle. But the Secret Service, violating the laws of Texas once again, absconded with the body and removed it from the hospital over the protests and just about running over Earl Rose and a justice of the peace. By the way, I forget his name, but a justice of the peace who showed up and rather sheepishly kind of gave in while they trolleyed out this casket. Okay. But they don't mention any of that, of course. They talk about Johnson. Oh, here's one of their lies, though, is that they talk about Johnson having ordered Kennedy's body removed and all this other stuff. Let me tell you something. The people that were sitting with Lyndon Johnson, and you can even check with Rufus Youngblood, who is the guy who actually dove over top of him and was a Secret Service agent who probably wasn't hungover enough not to have done his job that day, like most of them were, because they spent time at a place called the Underground in Fort Worth and were there until at least 4 in the morning, according to most accounts, drinking hard liquor. They had actually left the local fire department in Fort Worth guarding the hotel where the president was staying. Don't believe me? Look it up. But Rufus Youngblood is the guy who dove on LBJ. And you can catch that in some of the photographs and things. You can see a Secret Service agent. That's that guy's name. But even checking with him and the rest of the people that were there at Parkland, you can find out that Lyndon Johnson had no idea that he was the President of the United States officially until they had him outside and a cadre of Secret Service surrounded him and started saying Mr. President to him. This is even based on his own accounts if you check. Did you want to jump in, Michelle? I know I'm going over a lot of stuff here.
Well, I do have questions, but I don't know. I mean, they're very, very broad questions, similar to our conversation last night. So I don't know if it's not in-depth enough for the, okay, I take that back because they're very in-depth questions. They're very loaded questions. And what I'm thinking right now, did Johnson have any part in... Did he have any part in JFK's assassination? I mean, of course he had something to gain from it because he became the president. But from your extensive research, is there anything pointing to him knowing or being a part of it?
It seems to me very, very likely, and I'm sure that if you take a look at the issue of the National Security Action Memorandums is a really good sort of barometer on this. See, okay. National Security Action Memorandum 263 was issued by John F. Kennedy just prior to the assassination, and it called for the removal of 1,500 troops from Vietnam by the end of 1963, which was only 2 months away, and the removal of all U.S. personnel by the end of calendar year 1965. Okay. National Security Action Memorandum 273, which these are written in sequential order, was actually being drafted before Kennedy was dead. It was being drafted by at least one person who wound up being one of Johnson's main military advisors, as well as the regular Kennedy people. And that NSAM Order 273 actually completely reversed the Vietnam withdrawal policy. That was being drafted ostensibly while the majority of the people that should have been drafting it were actually up in the air in an airplane on their way to Honolulu, okay? And meanwhile, it was drafted in Washington. So there's like a really spooky kind of thing about that, and that is one of the first things that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed as President of the United States. So it seems to me as though that is suggestive that he had an idea. I think that the people that I blame in the intelligence community would have certainly had to have turned to him and said, look, be ready to play ball because you're about to be the pitcher. That's the way I see it. As for the people that think that it was, some sort of Texas mob conspiracy, and that it was like the oil men that did it and everything else, I'm not just saying that they had nothing to do with it, but to believe that oil men and Lyndon Johnson, who was a back smoke-filled room kind of politician, could have pulled off something this sophisticated, I think is just not looking at the totality of what went on. The cover-up afterwards, the sophistication that was required to pull off all this stuff, the silencing of any intelligence assets that could have possibly blown the whistle on this whole thing. The fact that there was previous assassination attempts which looked very similar to Dallas as well. If you don't believe that, I'll tell you what, you can see it on my YouTube channel. It's under the title The Chicago Plot. Leads to a whole lot of other questions. But I mean, literally less than 30 days before, there was another former Marine supposedly working a dead-end job in an elevated building on the parade route for the presidential motorcade in a hostile city, on November 2nd. Okay? Well, doesn't that seem a little strange to you, too?
No doubt. No doubt. It's definitely a cause for concern. And while you're mentioning your YouTube channel, can you shout out the name of that so I can check it out along with all of our listeners right now? Because we definitely have a full room right now that's listening. We've got a few people from NWO that are listening. I know the Mouse over here, and I know Vincent's in here, and I know there's a couple guys that we talk to often in here. Jim's in here, so we've got quite an audience tonight. So I want to make sure everybody gets all the information possible from you.
Oh, all right. Well, my YouTube channel, which is partially taken down because they banned some of my videos and everything else.
Imagine that, right?
But if you just go into YouTube and search for Blind JFK, it comes up because I used to be called the Blind JFK Researcher, and I'll still own that title. Thanks. But yeah, if you look on there and you find the Chicago plot, and you know what? If they happen to have banned that on YouTube, it may possibly still be up on the Daily Motion channel, same name. So, give it a shot. But even if you can't find my stuff, just type Chicago plot JFK into a search engine. You'll find an article by Edwin Black in the 1970s trying to...
your video's still up.
Oh, okay.
And if you guys like us on Facebook, I'm going to go ahead and post that to our Facebook right now.
Oh, cool. All right. See, this is it. This is really... I need your help with this kind of stuff because I get to just run in my mouth and then that's all I do.
Well, we're both pretty good at that, but we all got to have a backup, and we're pretty good at that for each other.
Oh, thank you. And you know what? I'm glad Lee is here too, huh?
Yeah, we've got a couple of guys in here. They're popping their UCY cherry, so glad to have them in here. And then we do have some regulars that are in here. I don't know if they've ever called in. We've got Jax, we've got Desert Hawk. We have a few people that we do have regulars, and though they may not call in, we definitely appreciate you guys listening. So
absolutely,
just want to give those guys a shout out, and they're all pretty good to me. So.
Absolutely, and you know what? I love all you guys that are listening to me, even if you disagree with me. Please, I enjoy it.
You would be surprised. They're all really supportive of us. I guess they just talk crap behind their backs, but they already know I'll find them and I'll throw down.
They just like you. That's what it is.
Well, what can I say? I take a good selfie. That's what we call it now? I think so.
I believe that's what the kids are calling it nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's what we call it these days. I do have another question regarding, the totality of even tonight's show. We all know that mainstream media is owned, of course. Why did CNN so blatantly falsify? I mean, truly, that's what it is. Why did they make this huge show about crap, about BS?
Well, see, that was the thing. It wasn't originated with CNN, this one. They're grabbing up documentaries from all different sources. This is actually a Tom Hanks thing. Tom Hanks, Gary Getzman, the people at Playtone. And as I explained in the opening part, I was actually publicly trying to protest this with other JFK researchers a few years ago to put a stop to it because there was going to be like this 12 or 13-part miniseries on HBO. And every time one of these like big miniseries comes out, people start to believe that that's the real history. And look, the totally different subject, but the John Adams miniseries, which was on HBO, okay, pretty good. I liked it. It was entertaining. But you know what? There's a ton of historical inaccuracies in there. That is due to the damage done by putting our trust in people like Stephen Ambrose and such. And the problem is that, I actually knew, here's the funny thing. One of the people that I'm friendly with is the guy who got a lot of his material stolen, a lot of his original research on John Adams stolen to be put into and misrepresented in the book that was based on, and then it was even further misrepresented on HBO. So, when you spend a lot of years trying to get things right and trying to eliminate the mythology of a situation, and to me the mythology here ranges anywhere from, Lee Harvey Oswald did it to, all the way on up to, well, it was actually the MJ, the magic documents where, basically they say that Kennedy was killed because he was going to reveal the existence of extraterrestrial interaction with our country. This is also nonsense. The documentation for it is, in some cases, fabricated wholesale. There is no real foundation for that. And it's silliness. It's like the limo driver shot him. Also not true. That's just a bad copy of the Zapruder film. That's where Bill Cooper comes in, because that's where I started with the whole, I saw a Bill Cooper presentation, and I saw it with my own eyes, how bad his film was. And I still can't believe that people are still batting this thing around. Cooper was doing that in the late 80s. And people are still presenting it on the internet and still batting it around as one of these, see, the limo driver did it. It's really just a muddy copy of the film. Now, as for the film's authenticity in the first place, I could do a show on that as well, but man, if you want to get into some boring stuff, but just in brief, the Zapruder film has, at the very least, in my opinion, from all the stuff I've seen, has been tampered with. So it's already an illegitimate document, in my opinion. It took me a long time to come to that conclusion, and I got to say that for the majority of my time as a researcher, I believed it was an honest, serious film. But, there are people in Hollywood working on it right now that got a forensic copy of the so-called original from the National Archives, and I think sometime in the next 2 years, you're going to see an extensive study on the fabrication of the Zapruder film come out. I really do believe that. Because I know that there are some very serious people that make a living doing this stuff that are working on it and looking at it. But that's another subject for another day. Why CNN does this? CNN is, like I said, morphing into something else. Like the A&E network used to be like this, where they did these documentaries and crime dramas where they show you reenactments of crimes, and his wife trusted him, and therefore, when she went on vacation, he went out for some extra supplies for murder. Like these kind of, you know what I mean? And it's really sad, because there's still a lot of the Walking Dead out there that still think that it's a legitimate source for news. And, the many different lies that I see told on there are funny, but when I see this, 2-hour presentation of crap, it's like I can't help myself. I don't know.
Well, what's funny is I recently saw, probably on some crap news site on the internet, probably on Yahoo or some bullshit. I mean stuff. Sorry. That I think more Americans get their news from the Colbert Report than they do from mainstream media, and which of course is unfortunately an extension of mainstream media because it's owned by Comedy Central, owned by Viacom. But still, point is more people get their news from satire. That's how people get their news these days. So we can only take what people think they know with a grain of salt.
Well, in my opinion, that's probably a better way to get it than most of them are.
Don't get me wrong, it's entertaining, but Colbert's a big old Obama lover at the end of the day. Anyway, that's another topic for another show.
Yep. And what's funny here too is that believe it or not, I've got more than a dozen pages of other notes here. I'm actually trying to cut through this as quickly as I can. And,
hey, Chuck, what's our phone number here so we can get some callers?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, guys. You know what? I totally forgot to mention that. Anybody can call in, 718-717-8296. We will take calls, and look, if you guys want me to shut up about this, I'll do that too, and we can get on to other topics.
I love this talk. I know that you think that people hate your JFK talk. I love it. We talk about this outside of the show. You and I talked about this extensively last night. So I think it's an interesting topic. But I have somebody, in our chat right now asking about, they're saying that you're only giving half of the story. So I'd really love to see what someone else has to say. I know that you're very, very, well-versed in this, and you've been studying for over 20 years, right?
Yeah, so look, please, if somebody's telling me I'm giving half the story, you know what? It could be that I'm simply glossing over stuff that I usually don't think of. But then again, it could be that somebody's in complete disagreement with me, and either way, I'd love to hear it. So, if you feel like calling in, please do.
Like I said, I think it's very interesting, and, JFK's assassination is definitely one of the biggest turning points in American history, and, I hate to say my generation, but you know, a lot of people my age, we know what we were taught, and there's so much of it that we don't know. Even, you know, listening to other truth, you know, freedom fighting, whatever genre.
You know I hit the right button, but anyway, and I bet you that's somebody telling me that I'm off the air. But I'm back. Okay, I know I hit the correct button, but for some reason it just did not do what it was supposed to do. All right, let me see if I can recreate here. Let's see, we'll drop that. All right. So, I guess somebody was going to join in and tell me that I'm only telling half of the story. That's fine. I would love to hear the other half, especially if you got stuff that I don't have. I would love to hear it. Okay. Whoops. Let's see now. Yeah, so please, caller that I just lost, come on back in. There we are. Hey. Okay. What is with the Skype this week, man? I hope you guys can still hear me out there. I don't know. I gotta tell you, the thing is behaving weird. I heard Souvenir have this problem. And, you know, I thought maybe I would be immune. But not today. Huh. That's alright. I will figure this out shortly. And you know what? Worst comes to worst, I'll just go back into what I was talking about before and bore you guys to death some more. I can't even get Michelle back in. Nice. Okay. Let's see now. One more shot at this. Okay. Now. So we were at only about 20 minutes in again, by the way. I talked about Bentley McDonald. Okay. Lee Harvey Oswald's arrest. Okay, fine. Now, we have the police that say... Oh, okay. The police immediately are announcing, and this is the chronology on the show. This is not the reality chronology, okay? That... Oh, here we go again. Okay. This is not fun. Alright. One more time. Alright, well, I hope I am still on. I was in the middle of talking to Lee Pierre the Mouth from Truth Emerges Radio and got lost there all of a sudden. I don't understand this tonight, I'll tell you. Okay, yep. So, Jimmy, I'm back on. Thank you. Alright. Appreciate that, man, because I can't understand this. This is like, this is very strange. Alright, well, you guys can hear me, so I'll just keep going, and then if anybody joins in, we will just add them on in. What can I say? I know Michelle tried to get back in, but, well, okay, so continuing on, the midnight press conference. Okay, everybody's seen the clips of Oswald standing there and explaining that he is, has no idea what all this is about. Yeah, he has no idea that what this is all about and everything else. And you see the police surrounding him, various angles. He says, I know I've been accused of shooting a policeman. I haven't been charged with that. Okay, all that kind of stuff. This was at the midnight press conference, which, of course, Jack Ruby was present at. Okay. Then we get to deal with Bugliosi, who's another trip and a half, let me tell you. Bugliosi, as I said before, the author of Reclaiming History, who claims that, people like myself have overcomplicated the case and have made a mess of it and everything else. Let's see. He says that, Bugliosi says it was obvious within hours. Yeah, it was obvious within hours. That's a quote. It was obvious within hours, and that Oswald was the only employee to flee the building. That's a lie, first of all, because others left before that head count. That's one of those things that they've been repeating over and over again. But, fact is that after the shots were fired and cops started rushing into the building and reporters were rushing in to utilize the phone and everything else, Oswald himself later would say that of course he left because he felt there was going to be no further work done that day, and he was correct. A lot of people left. But anyway, then he says, Bugliosi also says that during a 12-hour interrogation, which is a misrepresentation because there was a lot more than 12 hours of interrogation, all of which, by the way, there are no complete notes, there is no stenographer, there is no recording of this interrogation of Will Fritz or the rest of the Dallas Homicide Bureau. The only extensive notes were taken by a gentleman who actually doubled as an FBI agent and a postal inspector, and those are the only notes that exist. However, in recent years, people have pointed to these little chicken scratches that the head of homicide there, Will Fritz, took, which are very difficult to sort of interpret, if you will, because they're fragmented notes. Okay? Let's see, yeah, we told one provable lie after another, okay. Then we're dealing with Jesse Curry. Let's see. This is when they have Oswald in custody. Okay, fine. He says, precautions will be taken. We don't think the people will try and take Oswald from us. We'll handle it. We're going to transfer him by armored car, which was all these public statements that they made. And then, of course, we are then going to be treated to enter, of course, Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby, who miraculously, despite the fact that there are 70 Dallas police officers standing there, a horde of reporters, cars, lights, cameras, everything, shows up right on time and pops Oswald in the gut with one shot and kills him right there while he's handcuffed to two officers, Jim Lavelle and Elsie Graves. Okay. Let's see. Then we're greeted. This is again during the documentary. Curry then announces that Oswald is dead at 1:07 p.m. Of course, local time there. Cronkite covers it. Then the speculation on local news and national news about how Ruby and Oswald must be connected. Of course, that's topped off with Marguerite Oswald, who is Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, who was the very first person to say that she believed her son was an intelligence asset for the United States. Okay. Then they show a clip of the homicide chief, Will Fritz, who I mentioned previously, saying that the case was cinched. That actually is something that he said before Oswald was killed, but of course we're seeing it in this order. Then we go to another commercial break. It's about 43 minutes in. Okay, now during the commercial breaks, they're showing 1960s Allstate commercials, being cute with that, and of course running lots and lots of promos for the 60s and the OJ documentary series, which is going on there now. That's another miraculously wonderful thing. 20 years after the Bronco chase, let's relive it. Talk about making me vomit in my mouth. Anyway, then we're greeted with Earl Warren, the Chief Justice of the United States, giving a eulogy about JFK. Then the J.D. Tippit funeral, the Lee Harvey Oswald funeral, where members of the press had to carry him as pallbearers. The press were stating, or at least the broadcast press were stating, that it was because there were not enough friends or family to do so. This is not true. The U.S. Secret Service and the FBI secured the Oswald family ostensibly, which is Marina, the two children, and Marguerite, his mother, and his brother Robert, because John Pick was not involved in any of this. Okay, Michelle keeps popping up as if she's calling in and then disappears. I don't know why. Sorry, Michelle. If you stay up on the board there for a second, though, I'll drop you in. I don't know. Okay, so 5 days afterwards, LBJ addresses... Yeah, okay, so then we see LBJ address a joint session of Congress, talking about revenge for JFK. Okay, then we're greeted to Max Holland, who has been a CIA apologist and a lone assassin apologist forever, and of course is also listed in many places as an assassination witness, as he was a member of the press that day. He is one of these guys who... trace it for yourselves. It's kind of crazy. The state of Texas begins its inquiries. Waggoner Carr, who was the DA not the DA, sorry. I believe the Attorney General of the state of Texas was Waggoner Carr, right. And then, of course, District Attorney Henry Wade, yes, that is the same Wade from Roe versus Wade, is the guy who you usually see making the comments about Oswald. He's the guy who first spells out Lee Harvey Oswald, O-S-W-A-L-D, that guy. Okay. Then they start talking about these, this series of honorable men, which are the Warren Commission, and were treated with some of the, mainstream press coverage of the Warren Commission at the time. Now, there was plenty of underground alternative press which was really screaming about this at the time, and if you think about the list of individuals that make up the head of the Warren Commission, not just Earl Warren, but, Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the United States. Okay, fine. But then you have Richard Russell, was a segregationist, a Southern senator who did not want to even have anything to do with Earl Warren and really was no fan of JFK's. Okay, but I'll tell you something about Russell later on that we discovered is that he got really irritated with the FBI spoon-feeding the Warren Commission and tried to send some of his own staffers out to investigate. Now, oddly enough, there was a journalist named Dick Russell, who I pointed out to you guys before is the ghostwriter for Jesse Ventura, but previous to that, he was a writer for the Village Voice and wrote a book called The Man Who Knew Too Much, which is all about another guy who you really ought to check into, and I don't have time to go into right now, but go ahead and look up The Man Who Knew Too Much by Dick Russell. You'll find out about another guy who knew that the assassination was coming previous to the assassination, actually walked into a bank and fired a gun into a wall, walked outside, and waited to be arrested so that he would be in jail at the time of the assassination as opposed to participating in it. But anyway, back to the Warren Commission list. Richard Russell, we already mentioned. Gerald R. Ford, need I say more? Gerald R. Ford, by the way, was the guy who was vetting just about everything back to J. Edgar Hoover directly during the time of the Warren Commission, just to make sure that, the FBI wasn't made to look bad. Then we have, of course, the Grand Chancellor of World War II, post-World War II Germany, Mr. McCloy, who, commuted a whole bunch of death sentences for Nazi war criminals. But John J. McCloy, yeah, he's on the Warren Commission also. Next guy on the Warren Commission, and this is the 7 main Warren Commissioners, all right? Here's the biggest fun one for me. Allen Dulles, former head of the CIA, fired by John F. Kennedy. Of course, his brother was was in the Secretary of State position at one point while Dulles was running the CIA. You can check out the Dulles brothers' connections to a whole lot of interesting, terrible things in history if you like. Hale Boggs and John Cooper round out the Warren Commissioners. Now, Hale Boggs is an interesting character as well, and just go ahead and do a web search on Hale Boggs and plane crash mystery if you like. You can find out some interesting stuff about that. Of course, the dissenting Warren Commissioners, who did not want to sign on to the single bullet theory, who did not want to sign the report itself, are Richard Russell, Hale Boggs, and John Cooper, I think. But you'd have to double-check that. But you can find that there were dissenting Warren Commissioners who were kind of tricked into signing on and everything else. And, of course, you can find stuff at the LBJ Library where Johnson is essentially telling Richard Russell he's going to be on the Warren Commission despite his own protests. But that's a whole other thing. Yeah, so then we're kind of treated to a really softball approach about LBJ sort of bullying together the Warren Commission, which I just mentioned, and we got another commercial break. Okay, fine. Then we're dealing with the NBC reports that they wanted an independent report. The Warren Commissioners wanted an independent report. They wanted to do their own investigation. Historically speaking, though, the majority of the investigation of the Warren Commission was conducted by the FBI. There were many, many depositions, most of the exhibits. Because remember, in the 26 volumes, only about half of that is actually the testimony of witnesses, which they did call, and at some point, let's see, they took... Specifically, they took 395 depositions from 94 witnesses over a 10-month period. Okay, just so you know. Then we're treated to the CBS special in 1964 because the Warren Commission was released in September of 1964, just ahead of the 64 election, of course, to make sure that they quieted the rumors about LBJ having been possibly involved, which of course seemed kind of sensible on the surface considering it happened in Texas. And of course, like Michelle just said a little bit ago, he benefited by becoming the 36th president. Okay. But CBS was actually engaged in a 2-hour special on the Warren Commission at the time, at exactly the time of day, in fact, that the Warren Commission was released. And they started supporting it before they even had it publicly released, and then revealed that we've already had a copy of this, and we were only allowed to reveal it now, and this is Cronkite on one side of the screen and Rather on the other, I believe. And, the whole Oswald crazy kid story then ensues. We get, let's see, Bugliosi and, of course, a whole bunch of other stooges pretty much talking about how the Warren Commission was created and accepted by the... Oh, it was... No, not created, sorry. Was accepted by the media, was accepted by the public. Yeah, that's because they hadn't had a chance to read the 27 books, 26 volumes, plus the 1-volume report. They then show Robert Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's brother, supporting the Warren Commission conclusions. And yeah, my brother was a kook, and sorry. We now are introduced to Mark Lane and the Rush to Judgment deluge, which happened over the next couple of years. They show the Merv Griffin clips where Griffin is, pretty much attacking at his silliness. Mark Lane is badly edited, by the way, and you even see an aging Mark Lane on here, who was the first guy to really stand out and say that something was very much wrong with the public prosecution of Mr. Oswald. There's a whole history to Lane. I brought it up before. So then we are treated to the standard 1968 BBC special, which was pretty poorly done, although it did reveal a few interesting incongruities in the investigation. Let's see. Bugliosi then comes back on again and basically says that when people like myself and conspiracy theorists, the conspiracy theory industry even, begin to examine this whole thing, we basically create a bunch of, quote, mischief, end quote. We're then shown Penn Jones Jr., who had a few things wrong, but made some interesting inroads to the truth about the Kennedy assassination. Dr. Cyril Wecht, who is the guy for which the Wecht Institute of Forensics is named after at Duquesne University near Pittsburgh. But him sitting there basically attacking the single bullet theory. Then you have another agency-type stooge, Mr. Epstein. We have William F. Buckley, of all people, sitting there and contradicting in a rather sort of catty manner. I know that's sort of like, extremely redundant when it comes to William F. Buckley, but, completely repudiating Mark Lane's entire argument and all of that good stuff. Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy. Let's see, what else we got here? Decreasing government started with the assassination. Yeah, I've already covered that. Okay, now, Bugliosi says that the problem with people that have made this the most complex murder case in history, in the history of the world, is that we are splitting hairs and then splitting the split hairs. Well, sometimes you need to have a fine razor to cut through the bullshit. Then, of course, we're treated to some other public statements. Let's see, the 67 BBC special with Arlen Specter, who I have said many, many times, I really, really hope has a nice special place at the poker table in a flaming pit in the afterlife. Abraham Zapruder's daughter, William Turner, former FBI agent, talking about the violent head snap to the rear, which everybody knows. They've seen it on the Zapruder film. How that's indicative, obviously, of centrifugal force pushing the head backwards from a shot from the front, blah, blah, blah. Okay, Bugliosi then goes into a little tirade and says that there were no cartridges, no other bullets, and no witnesses that saw any other bullets being fired from any other gun except Oswald's gun, Oswald's bullets. Oswald is your man. Now, of course, Bugliosi ignores the fact that there was a slug found on the opposite side of Elm Street over by the manhole cover. That was one. That was disappeared. There were also other cartridge casings which we discovered later on that the FBI themselves discovered at various points in Dealey Plaza. That day, within minutes of the assassination, they were nixed, and guess what? They are not 6.5 millimeter Mannlicher Carcano rounds or shells. Okay? They're just not. Not to mention the fact that James Tague is struck way down the street by something, either cement resulting from a ricochet or the lead, which scratched his face. Excuse me again. But, I'm just splitting hairs of the split hairs. The fact that that evidence is being constantly destroyed, obfuscated, removed, redacted, should give us no sort of pause whatsoever, right, Vince? Anyway, let's see, we'll go over a slight, okay. Then Bugliosi goes into the whole thing about, 313 is generally the pivotal frame in the Zapruder film because this is the frame in which you see the debris spraying from Kennedy's head It is generally thought to be the moment of the headshot. I have my doubts about this now, but the Zapruder film ostensibly is running at 18 frames per second, and for only 1/18th of a second do you see the debris from this man's brains being blasted out of his head. Bugliosi points out that 1/18th of a second earlier, because imagine if a motion picture film is running at 18 frames per second, it is almost as if a singular photograph is being taken every 18 times per second, right? So here's the thing. An 18th of a second earlier, there is on the film the appearance that Kennedy's head moves forward prior to the violent head snap, which would then begin while his brains are being blasted out at 3:13. I don't have to explain to you what an 18th of a second can do and what the significance of a move could possibly be an 18th of a second. I don't think I need to do that. I think you guys can understand. But Bugliosi says that the fact that there is a movement forward at frame 312 causes you to know that he was struck from the rear. But why would we even bother with looking at 312? If that isn't when he was struck in the head, Oh, well, that was when he was hit in the back of the neck, which Gerald R. Ford, for those of you that don't know, is literally the guy who changed the wording in the draft of the Warren Report from back to back of the neck. If you take a look, it was, about 5 inches down from the base of the neck. And if you take a look at Kennedy's shirt, even the photographs, the shirt and the jacket which he was wearing that day, which they then tell you, was bunched up, so it appears as though the hole is lower. I don't think so. Not when a shirt and a jacket are both tailored, and and everything else. This bullet hole which is there, which is then surrounded by blood and everything else. Amazing how that could happen all the way up there like that, and considering that. He was also wearing a back brace. I think that there's no way that the magic bullet made it through his back at all. Anyway, it seems to have been a shallow wound of entry, which was reported by more than one doctor who saw the body. Not the Parkland doctors, because they didn't bother to turn him over, they say, because they were too busy making sure that they had given all sort of life-sustaining and saving procedures. But that's a story for another day. Perhaps one of these days I'll be able to dig out the tape I have with Dr. McClellan, because he was one of the guys who actually worked on Kennedy and Parkland Hospital that I was able to speak to. And boy howdy, if you ask him the right question, guess what you get. Anyway, so we return with the 1968 CBS. Okay, in 1968, CBS did a 4-part series, 4 nights. Believe me, this was a big thing when they did a 4-part series, pretty much breaking down the Warren Commission and trying to explain how right they were and conducting their own so-called tests and sort of scientifically reproving that the Warren Commission was correct. There are tons and tons of articles out there explaining to you exactly how false that entire 1968 CBS presentation was. Michelle might have rejoined me or might rejoin me momentarily. I got you on the Skype, but I am not hearing you. Okay, we can then go briefly through the single bullet theory, the Jack Ruby verdict, which he was sentenced to death, which he never got to be executed because in 1968 he died of cancer while in prison. Let's see, Bugliosi says that Jack Ruby was a terrible choice for a hitman. I love this argument as well. Let's see. They always bring up the fact that Oswald's move was delayed and that there were problems with his move and that Ruby just happened to be there. They never ever take into account that maybe Oswald's move was being delayed and he was being given options about putting on the black shirt as opposed to the white shirt and everything else to possibly delay him so that Ruby could get there from the Western Union office, which was less than a block away. He was transferring money to a stripper named Little Lynn, but the problem there, of course, is that The night before, he had transferred money to Little Lynn as well, and then suddenly had a need to transfer her another $20 at that particular Western Union office at that particular time. After spending most of the weekend posing as a reporter in the Dallas, police station, if you look really closely at some of the extant archival footage, you can find Jack Ruby in a lot of places in the Dallas, in the melee, let's just say, of the reporters that were there at the Dallas police station. Okay, now we finally get to one of the most brutal parts of it, where we start discussing Jim Garrison. Anybody who's listened to me talk about the assassination before knows exactly what I think of Jim Garrison. He's the only guy to ever bring a trial against any person for the murder of John F. Kennedy. First of all, he was the DA of New Orleans and New Orleans Parish, okay, in Louisiana. Okay, we get our usual slam from most people. Epstein again returns to slam anybody who's got anything to say that's conspiratorial in nature. Mark Lane comes out to support him, obviously, because Mark Lane did actually support him, and Mark Lane, having been one of the main spokespeople, having been directly involved in Oswald's defense with the commission and everything else, Lane is rather relevant. So, Michelle, you're back.
I'm back. I don't know what was going on, but I'm glad I'm back.
It went to chaos for some reason. I don't know, but I've continued on.
I was listening though.
Oh well, I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who listens to my ranting and raving, because now we're about to get into the part that made me really, really mad. Everybody knows that, okay, not everybody, let me stop there. The JFK film, which came out, in the early 90s, Oliver Stone's film, cavalcade of superstar character actors, all kinds. I mean, I'm serious. Walter Matthau, John Candy, Kevin Bacon, all these guys are in there, okay? So this was based on the Jim Garrison story. Tommy Lee Jones actually plays Clay Shaw, who is the guy that Garrison accused and brought to trial and could not convict. It is a provable fact. There are documents in the archives of the CIA, there are documents in the JFK Records Collection Act now, which show that not only was the Central Intelligence Agency directly interfering with Jim Garrison's investigation through numerous assets, bugging, the destruction of, and the stealing of documents, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, but Clay Shaw, who was supposed to be an innocent man, just a poor businessman who had been a soldier in World War II, that Jim Garrison was merely attacking him because he was a closeted homosexual. That was Garrison's motivation, supposedly. Garrison went out of his way not to bring up Shaw's homosexuality in any of the proceedings. Check the records if you want. You can find them at the Assassination Records Archive. I got to think about that a second, but the Garrison transcripts are available there for the most part. There's a couple of them missing, but you can see that there was no mention of Shaw's homosexuality for yourself, if you like. They also dredge up an NBC presentation, a white paper, which was slamming Garrison, claiming that he was hypnotizing, drugging, bribing, threatening, and intimidating witnesses in order to come out and be on the side of prosecuting Shaw. Here's what they don't tell you on CNN. That footage that he just used was something that Garrison took him to court for and then was awarded time under the Fairness Doctrine to respond. NBC was actually punished for doing such a nonsensical and libelous program. And they had to give Garrison equal time, by the way. And you can find that on my Daily Motion channel. Garrison's response. You might actually be able to find the NBC thing, which I think I called NBC Hatchet Job on Garrison on my YouTube channel also. Something that NBC didn't even want to allow out of its vaults, by the way. Okay. So, despite the fairness doctrine, yeah. Okay. I already talked about the bribes, the hypnosis. Okay. Bugliosi, I love it, starts to characterize Garrison this way. Now, Garrison was constantly being misquoted, misrepresented, and then re-edited every time he spoke. I had John Barber on this program who tried to bring that particular story to ABC. He freaked out. If you remember the story about him screaming at people and flipping out because they had re-edited Garrison's answers to make him look like a lunatic when they said, well, how many assassins do you think there were? The next thing turns to Garrison speaking. He says something like 32. John Barber told you himself on my air that they re-edited stuff to make him sound crazy on the air constantly. So, look into it for yourselves. Then, of course, there was the Johnny Carson interview, which they show parts of it, and that's a hard-to-find thing. They stated that, again, that Garrison was prosecuting it as if it was a homosexual conspiracy. A couple of notable facts about that. Garrison refused to prosecute people in the state of Louisiana for what they called crimes against nature. Guess what those are, ladies and gentlemen? So the district attorney of New Orleans Parish refused to prosecute any of those crimes. I don't think he was going, and like I said, I dare you to find the evidence of him prosecuting or persecuting Shaw for his homosexuality anywhere in the court record, anywhere in Garrison's public statements. If you can find it, please bring it to me, because I'd love to be wrong. Anyway, then we're shown the Shaw verdict where he holds up, the not guilty. Of course he was not guilty. But the CIA interference is a matter of record at this point. You can take a look at, I'm trying to think of Perry's name now. But there's a taxi driver which had been at a meeting between Shaw and a guy named David Ferry and a guy named Leon Oswald, who was explaining how the plot was being laid out between these people. Shaw, by the way, like I said, we now have, under the Freedom of Information Act, plenty of evidence that he was a CIA asset. He was used as a source, an international source, and was considered trustworthy as one of those professional outsourced assets. Check it out for yourselves. The fact that he was screaming CIA about Shaw, that also makes him crazy, right? Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, absolutely.
So, as we know, I'm new to the JFK, new to JFK, the truth side of it. Now, I know the CNN documentary is new, but you basically said it was just a revamp, just a compilation of old documentaries. Did the CNN documentary present any new material, whether it be true or falsified? Did it show anything different than what we've seen in the past?
Well, interspersed here, this is where I brought up, like we had an aged Dan Rather and stuff like that. Interspersed, you have, more current interviews with people like Bob Huffaker was brought up in here. So you see him as a young guy saying, Lee Harold Oswald has been shot, which, was wrong. But he was there. He was excited. It was a mess. It was chaos. I understand. But Hoffaker's there, and then you see him today, which he's like, very much older. But it was pretty much just them backing up the old clips, which I found kind of funny. Mark Lane is on there, who is a guy who is, like, on our side of things. Like I said, but he's the guy. So, you can imagine, how old Lane is at this point, considering that he was capable of being not only a campaign manager for JFK in New York, but he was also a New York State Assemblyman. He was a lawyer at that time and was actually asked to represent Oswald's interests with the Warren Commission almost 50 years ago now. So, imagine how old he is. There he is. But realistically speaking, it was just a recut of a lot of this archival stuff, and the new Bugliosi thing pretty much driving the drum, which is, like banging the drum at the head of the parade here, which really makes me want to throw up. I mean, it's just that simple. The Bugliosi has written plenty of books, and I hate to even say this, but it is questionable sometimes whether his work is his own, especially when you consider the history of the way his book came together, with the Reclaiming History book on this one. I'll give him credit where credit is due. However, he's also the same guy who wrote the prosecutorial brief for George Bush. So, basically why George Bush ought to be in prison. I forget the name of the book, but I'm sure if you look up Bugliosi, you'll find it. But he also most famously did a whole book about the concept of God, where he rather arrogantly sort of dismisses most people's religious beliefs and pushes agnosticism at best. But anyway. But he first came to light as the guy who prosecuted Charles Manson, which always cracked me up because, if you listen to half of Manson's rants, and I hate to say this to everybody, but if you listen to a lot of Manson's rants, you do know that he wasn't entirely batshit, right? He had a lot of things right about the condition of the world, the way it was going to wind up. So, sorry about that. I know that's a long answer. All right, so at this point, we're, an hour and 43 in, which is, I'm an hour and a half into my show. But I did digress a whole lot because that's what I do, right? Let's see. Bugliosi, okay. This is what he says about Garrison, which made me a little crazy. Also, he says that, oh, no, wait a minute. This isn't even about Garrison. This is about everyone who is a conspiracy theorist. That they have accused 42 groups, 82 assassins, and 242 people in total. Now, I'm dead serious. I made sure to make a good note of this. I don't know how that math works. I would like somebody to show me that. Because those numbers seem oddly specific. They all end in 2. I don't know. It seems a little bit off there, but I don't know how that math works out. 42 groups, 82 assassins, but yet 242 people is what he claims. To his credit, though, I will say that probably the kookier conspiracy theories out there have probably blamed a hell of a lot more than 242 people for the assassination. So I'll give him that one. But I'd love to know what these 42 groups are, quite honestly, because I read his book and I didn't see 42 groups. And, please, by all means, do not read that book. You can't get those brain cells back, okay? And you can't get that time back. The guy owes me 3 months of my life for even spending time on this thing and the CD-ROM. Okay. Let's see. Medical. Love to prove conspiracy. Okay. Dan Rather says that the media, he's speaking on behalf of the media, by the way, retired Dan Rather, the media would love to prove that there was a conspiracy. Really. I would love to see those efforts, exactly where your love to prove that there was a conspiracy would be. Because they've basically done nothing as far as the alphabet soup has gone, but to back the Warren Commission and pretty much call anyone who doesn't a conspiracy theorist, a kook, a nut, a conspiracy buff. These are all words that they have used for guys like myself. And you know what? Maybe I am. But, if there weren't so many conspiracies out there in the world, maybe I wouldn't be so damn busy.
What would we do on our Friday and Saturday nights and Tuesdays and Thursdays? What would we do at night? What would I do on the weekends? Because, you guys are my dates. Don't tell Kim. I don't think she'll mind, but, Saturday night, and here I am talking with you about JFK. But this is where I start to get really most upset, guys. And I know. I do shows on this, and I know I'm putting some people to sleep, but I really don't care. I know I'm popping a lot of information out there that I know is dead solid.
And I don't play around in the netherworld of this too much. I've explored it. Believe me, I've tried to see if it was as crazy as some people say it is. I've looked into the whole ritualistic killing thing, the 33rd parallel, the 33rd degree of masonry, all that kind of stuff. I think what we have here is a blatant sort of murder by the intelligence agencies to prove to anyone that was even remotely in the know that it could be done and that it could be gotten away with. And guess what? It has been. Okay. Bugliosi says, though, that all the proof that there is, any of the real tangible proof outside of the kookiness of the conspiracy theorists, points to Oswald. That there is no proof of anything else. Then, of course, he starts to point to the Soviet episode where Oswald defected to the Soviet Union briefly and returned, and I did a show on that. You guys heard that if you heard my interview with Ernst Titovitz, who was his best friend in Russia. But here's the thing. They utilized that storyline, and this is my commentary now, and pretty much tried to point to the fact that he was trying to defect back to the Soviet Union right before the assassination, that he had been present at the Soviet and the Cuban consulates in Mexico City before that. Now, here's the thing. When the CIA was asked to produce, because, of course, the CIA was monitoring the Soviet and Cuban consulate/embassies. By the way, they're two different things. Don't be confused. They were monitoring these buildings for any sort of subversive activity, etc., etc. They also knew that one of the main players in the assassination, sabotage, and terrorism department of the KGB was stationed in Mexico City, so they had a reason to participate. To participate in the surveillance of those places, and they did, by photo, by wiretap, etc., etc., etc. Guess what, though, ladies and gentlemen? There is no picture of Lee Harvey Oswald having entered or departed from either embassy or consulate. The telephone conversations which are reported to be of Oswald, well, here's the thing. Legendarily, he's supposed to have spoken Russian very well. The caller on the line does not speak Russian well, speaks accented English, and speaks Spanish rather well. If you can find me a legitimate individual who actually knew Lee Harvey Oswald that believes he spoke Spanish, please do direct them to me, because I've never heard of one.
Where is Lee Harvey Oswald from?
Born in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, if he's from Texas, that is somewhat feasible, but, I mean, New Orleans, not so much, so, all right.
Yeah.
I got to throw in a word sometimes.
No problem. But he spent time, most of his childhood was spent, it's kind of weird, because his childhood was kind of broken up. He's from New Orleans, a lot of his school records come from there, but he also spent time in New York City, he spent time in Texas, immediately went to the Marine Corps, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different places that he was. He did live in the Soviet Union briefly. But nobody has ever said that he could speak Spanish, and it was fluent Spanish. Like, he was speaking fluently to the Cuban embassy. Another interesting thing about that is that the tapes vanished after they were supposedly transcribed, and that's a whole interesting story if you ever get into that. But here's the funniest thing about it that I realized a couple of years ago. One of the phone calls when he's going back and forth trying to get this visa to travel back to the Soviet Union or to Cuba, which is ostensibly the reason why he was there, during one of those conversations, it is noted that it's a Saturday. And the problem with that is that there was no switchboard operator on a Saturday at the Cuban consulate or at the Cuban embassy. And nobody's ever been able to explain that one to me. So I don't know how he even got connected to who he got connected to. Also, there's a whole episode about the individuals that actually saw Oswald there being bullied into giving a description which was more like his. And the photographs, which were later given to the House Select Committee, there was initially 2 of them that were published in the Warren Commission. And nobody can explain to me to this day who this guy is, that they claim that this was the Oswald, person. The House Select Committee actually got their hands on, and don't even ask me how, on 11 of them. And in all 11 photographs, this guy is like, looks more like the guy who played the dad on the Webster TV show than Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a skinny little guy with dark hair and a receding hairline. Yeah, go ahead and look that up, too, if you want. Oswald in Mexico City. It's my opinion that he was never there. But, again, one of those up and down kind of things. But this is what they used to support the idea that he was still like a communist sympathizer. And, of course, a commie killed our president. Yeah. How childish does that sound now?
Well, it was kind of commonplace back then,
Oh, yeah.
Everything was the commies.
Well, but that was the thing, and this is why they could push that whole, and this is where we go from, in the CNN thing, is they are still with the whole, Oswald was delusional, he wanted to make his mark in history, because of one of the guys that was in the Marines with him said that he wanted to do something that would go down in the history books for 10,000 years. I spoke to a couple of Oswald's Marine, a couple of guys who served with him in the Marines. I'm not going to get into deep details on it, but this is totally incongruous with who the guy was supposed to have been. He was quiet. He was having trouble in the Marines, okay? He was a weak kid. He had a troubled background. His dad died before he was born. His mother was kind of a bit of a head case. Look, the guy had his issues and was probably, really easily recruited by intelligence assets. So, of course, and believe me, they don't even get into the whole thing about Oswald was a U-2 radar operator, that Oswald was stationed at a CIA base in Atsugi, Japan. They don't get into any of that on this show. None of that stuff is touched. Okay. And, of course, one of the most forgotten things about that day in Dallas, we now are finally treated to way, way deep into this documentary, and that's the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit, which, people claim that Oswald just shot him. He stopped him on the street when he was walking, and Oswald pulled a revolver and killed him right across his police car and dropped him on the ground and left him there. He then proceeds to throw away his jacket, eject shells from a revolver, and all that other good stuff, despite the fact that the police on the radio were relaying it back into the station, explaining that they were looking at semi-automatic shells as opposed to revolver shells. At least 2 witnesses saw more than one person killing the police officer. One of them was a black lady who was afraid to come forward for a couple of years, named Akila Clemens. There were other people that they claim were direct eyeball witnesses to this, that were behind bushes, that had their heads down and everything else when they started to hear shots. And the real reliable witness here, which CNN had the good taste not to bring up, was Helen Markham, who even the Warren commissioners commented in an executive session was a screwball. She couldn't get her description of him right. She couldn't get anything else right. And at the end of the day, if you take a look at documentaries where she was interviewed before she died, she tells these people, these television people, that she had her hands over her eyes most of the time anyway. And when she saw the guy, if you listen carefully to her description and you look at photographs of Oswald, even color photographs, it's hard to match up the guy she's talking about to Oswald. Okay, he was supposed to have bushy hair, even though Oswald's hair was cropped really close. He had like a reddish complexion. Oswald was pale as a ghost. But anyway, I ramble on.
It's all coincidence,
Of course. Then we get into, now, here's another interesting character from that time period, General Edwin Walker. It is said that Oswald attempted to kill Edwin Walker just previous to the assassination. Here's the trouble with that. When investigators for the House Select Committee presented General Walker with the bullet which had just missed his head by 1 inch in his study, in his house, which was fired through his window, and someone did try to kill him, they showed him the bullet, which he dug out of the wall himself. Okay? Walker said, this is not the right bullet. Walker said it was the wrong caliber. repeatedly. Okay? Because it wasn't a Mannlicher-Carcano bullet. They're trying to tie the Mannlicher-Carcano to the Walker shooting, to the Walker attempted shooting, I should say. And gee, that's pretty funny, because from about 30 feet away, Oswald can't hit Walker in the head. But from 60 feet away, through foliage, at an odd angle, and a half-closed window with a defective scope, and a rifle which shot high and to the right any damn way, well, guess what? He scores 2 shots on Kennedy, and one complete miss for no apparent reason that strikes Tague. Matter of fact, one of them was so good that it took off half of Kennedy's brain, although the brain photographs at the National Archives don't reflect that. And the other, of course, passed through Kennedy's neck, according to them, and went on to hit John Connally. But, again, I digress. So, yeah, Walker pulled the bullet. I already explained that. Okay, so now we're an hour and 53 in. Yes, thank God, people. I'm almost done with my show and almost done with this rant. Cronkite comes back on because he is, of course, the purveyor of wholesome truth out there, isn't he? Talks about how a little man killed a great man, and this is why people don't want to believe it, and a lot of other people say that it's just so fantastic and unbelievable that this little nothing loser would by random chance have a shot to kill the most powerful man in the world, and therefore it's something that people don't want to accept. And I really wish I could accept that, because it would make a whole lot more sense than what I've discovered. We finally get treated to Robert Dallek, who is another historian / writer type guy who butchers and totes the party line. Let's see. He says that the American people take comfort in conspiracy. This is why it's more comforting to us to believe this. It's more comforting to believe that elements of our own government, that individuals that we can't prosecute, would murder someone that we elected. At that time, I think we had a shot at actually electing leaders. That is no longer the case. It is my opinion that JFK was probably the last president who actually held some power. Of course, Richard Nixon was the last guy to think he held some power. All right? And since the agency couldn't put a bullet in another president so quickly for challenging it, Dick Helms opted to utilize his own guys, including guys who instructed black bag jobs to turn around and purposely screw up a third-rate burglary at the Watergate Motel, hotel, whatever the hell it was, and hang Mr. Nixon out to dry for doing nothing more than your average politician probably does on a Wednesday. But
I'm going to ask you a silly question really quick.
Sure.
Okay, so
I love silly questions.
I'm full of them. A lot of people thought JFK was the answer to our nation's problems, and a lot of people believe that our nation would be different now if JFK had not been assassinated. Now, we know that he was elected as a Democrat. Do you think he is a fair and accurate representation of the Democratic Party? And if not, what party do you think he would be associated with today?
Well, realistically, Kennedy was not as liberal as the people that like to lionize him say he was. He was pragmatically a Cold Warrior in a lot of ways, so he was caught up in all that, but he was learning. And he also had a very different view of the Third World, which, you know, if you examine his adventures previous to becoming president, even as a congressman traveling to Indonesia, Indochina, and African nations to examine the Third World for himself, to understand the people's plights. This was not a run-of-the-mill Democrat or Republican by any means. But that being said, probably contextually, he'd be more Republican than he was Democrat, according to, you know, the more current kind of, ideologies, I would say. But that's irrelevant, because at the end of the day, he was really challenging the concept of, and if you look at the speeches at American University, if you look at the Rice University speech where he was talking about going to the moon, and he was talking about cooperation, and he was talking about how, very global concepts, and I know everybody shudders when I use that term, but global concepts are not evil things. If you listen very carefully, in many of his speeches, he talked about how, we can see them as our enemies. I understand that, but, understand that we all breathe the same air, we all occupy the same planet, and we all cherish our children's futures. That's one of JFK's main platforms. And I defy anyone to show me a politician on the grand scale at this point that legitimately is attempting to even affect anything remotely similar to that. Barack Obama, you don't know, again, another one of those vomit in my mouth moments when Caroline Kennedy supported him. God help me. Poor misleaded girl, She's not the one saluting in the famous photo, but she is there with her mother. JFK Jr. or John was saluting his father as he passed. But Caroline, a lot of things can be said about her, but her support of Obama as if he was some second coming of JFK, I mean, wow. Again, Kennedy was going to pull us out of Vietnam, and under Obama, year 13 and counting in Afghanistan. Now longer than Vietnam.
Yeah,
so,
Afghanistan is terrible. You and I have talked about that I have, I know someone in Afghanistan right now, and we were talking on Skype, and literally had to hang up because they had to take a weapon because someone was breaking into the compound. Keep in mind, this is a secured compound, and they still had to have weapons, and it's bad over there, especially because elections are happening today. So, elections, quote unquote. But, Bush was full of it. There's been nothing about a mission accomplished over there whatsoever. But again, another tangent, how we are.
Well, right. But, and people immediately fire back at me about, when I criticize Obama for still being there or still allowing our people to be there. Bush started it. Yeah, I know Bush started it. But guess what? It was Eisenhower who backed up the French in Vietnam. Okay, the French were there first. We really started supporting them till they got their asses kicked at Bien Bien Phu and all that. That's when the tide turned over there, and it was like, well, we need to put in the Green Berets, and we need to get in the Special Forces guys to back. I mean, it's a whole, but it really, for me, it's very similar, except that, thankfully, we have not lost as many of our own people as we did there. But there's still a huge percentage of wounded, which are not being reported. There is a whole lot of damage being done to our society in general. I mean, how many mutilated men must be returned back to us for the sake of illegal, immoral war? I mean, that's really the general message in my mind. I mean, we're looking at the fall of Iraq this week. The fall, once again, of Iraq. This ISIS, which I think is a front BS thing, and I just have to throw this one thing out there real quick. The Islamic blah blah blah. Okay, tell me if you're attempting to gain traction in the Arabic world, why you would use in English, the English words, and then create your anagram out of English words for ISIS. Come on. It's Al-Qaeda 2.0, and that's all it is. Except these guys are more extreme than Al-Qaeda guys. So we're looking again at another excuse to reintroduce more people into another part of the world where we don't belong, and to devastate the civilian population, not to mention, like I said, all of the men that are going to be returned to us damaged and dead.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is that there isn't more of an outcry from even the sleepwalkers out there who believe that the system still works. Because if you think the system is still working for you, why aren't you guys barraging Barack Obama, barraging the Senate, barraging the Congress with emails, letters, phone calls? Do you really think that this is still about keeping us safe from terrorists? I mean, seriously, all these years later, all this crap that's gone on, do you think that this actually has done any good? If you do, good luck to you. Again, I said I have this East Coast, Atlantic Ocean view property in Arizona, and I'll be glad to sell it to you at a good price.
I'd love it. Chuck, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to touch base with you about another thing I actually had a question on about JFK, and I'm sure 5 minutes will never be enough to talk about this, but talk to me about Marilyn Monroe. Because she's such a beacon and young women now, because a drug addict woman who had an affair with the president is a great role model for teenagers. But I digress. Talk about it. There's something there. There has to be something there.
Well, okay. For those of you out there who think that I'm going to say that there is a connection to Marilyn Monroe's death, conspiratorial, no. What we have here is a very simple problem. She was taking a lot of, she was drinking heavily, and she was taking a lot of prescription meds that were being described by doctors, and you're looking at an accidental overdose, and it wasn't the first one. She had almost killed herself more than once, and through private physicians, a lot of that stuff was kept suppressed. I actually have had the chance to speak to someone who was present at her autopsy, and there is no evidence of foul play there. It's just one of those things that's been blown up. But another interesting thing that's been blown up about that, though, is that people claim that there were all these occasions for John to have had an affair with Marilyn. There were a couple of possibilities. But, based on the Secret Service records, which we had to pry out of them and recollate ourselves in order to understand and everything else, truthfully, there wasn't much of an opportunity. And I'll give you another fact here, a little factoid about it, that usually makes me really discredit a lot of these wild sort of, JFK being the serious hound stories that it's impossible. The problem is he suffered from something called Addison's disease, which means that his adrenal glands were, atrophied. Without adrenaline, it's pretty hard to get aroused. That's the first problem. The second problem is if you look at the cocktail of drugs that this man was on, and the fact that his back was generally in a brace because it was unstable. From his injuries previous to World War II, but then his injuries when he was a PT boat captain, PT 109, which is, a little bit overblown, his heroic role in that whole incident, but nonetheless, he was re-injured during that, had a back surgery when he was a congressman even, and he had various surgeries over the years, but the drugs alone that he needed to be on in order to get by, and in combination with the fact that there wasn't a great opportunity for a lot of these so-called affairs, I think it's just one of those things that's been seized upon to sort of assassinate his character afterwards. Because after all, if he was nothing but one of these rich elite snobs who was a playboy, who cared nothing about family, his country, or anything else, and was only interested in furthering his own political ambitions, then his assassination was a whole lot more meaningless. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned to After the Last Cup, the Ochelli Effect on UCY.TV radio. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Nye.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things.
I said to
in
myself,
all these
that
books,
guy,
how can that be
reminds
possible?
me of the brain.
You know, pistols and fondle slap of choice. I don't know when computers doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not just Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the information comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they